The lunch crowd at Tommy's diner was the usual mess, loud, impatient, and more interested in their phones than the people around them. Forks clinked, soda machines hissed, and the sizzle of overused grease filled the air. In the middle of it all moved Riley, a 27-year-old waitress who never asked for attention, never raised her voice, and never took a break. She was the kind of person people noticed, and then chose to look away from. Her face told a story, scars traced down her jaw and neck, rough and permanent like lightning bolts across her skin. A faded tattoo peeked from under her rolled-up sleeve, something old, something official, but no one ever looked close enough to care. She smiled gently as she poured coffee. Cleared plates. Wiped down booths. She didn't flinch when customers stared. She didn't blink when kids pointed. She just kept working. But today was different. Today, the whispers got louder. At table 6, a group of young guys in college hoodies were scrolling through TikTok and laughing too loudly at things that weren't funny. Until Riley walked past their booth. One of them leaned in and snorted. "Hey, Freddy Krueger's little sister," he muttered under his breath. The others burst into giggles. Riley heard it, of course she did. But she didn't react. She just kept walking, tray in hand, her eyes low and her posture still. That wasn't enough for them. Another guy piped up, louder this time, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "You should wear a mask, honey. You're scaring the ketchup bottles." This time, the laughter rolled across the room like a wave. Forks paused. Heads turned. A couple in the corner tried not to smile. Even the cook at the back let out a short chuckle. But Riley didn't stop. She dropped off a plate at table 3, smiled gently at a crying toddler, and tucked a loose hair behind her ear. She'd learned a long time ago that reacting only made it worse. But not everyone stayed quiet. In the far corner of the diner sat a man no one had really noticed until now. Older. Quiet. Weathered. His back was straight. His flannel shirt neatly tucked in. A faded green army cap rested on his head. He'd been silently sipping black coffee, watching everything. But he wasn't staring at Riley's scars like the others were. He wasn't laughing. He was looking at her arm. Or more specifically, the tattoo on it. His brow furrowed. His eyes sharpened. His hands gripped the edge of the table. And then, he stood up. The room quieted almost instantly, like someone had turned down the volume on the diner. He took a few careful steps forward. Slow. Steady. Intentional. Riley finally turned toward him, confused. Slightly tense. He looked her dead in the eye, not with pity. Not with disgust. But with something else. Something deeper. Then he raised his hand. And saluted her. Yes. A full military salute, firm and respectful. The room froze. The college boys who had laughed just seconds ago. Their faces dropped. Their mouths hung half open. Riley blinked, unsure whether to speak or cry. The man held the salute and said, in a calm, shaking voice. "Staff Sergeant Riley Carter?" She hesitated. Then nodded. "Yes, sir." The silence became even heavier. You could hear the clock ticking. Someone dropped a spoon. The man slowly lowered his salute and pointed to her tattoo. 3rd Medical Battalion. Afghanistan. Forward Operating Base Phoenix, he said quietly. "My nephew owes you his life. You pulled him out of that Humvee before it exploded." Riley's lips parted, her voice caught in her throat. I remember," she whispered. "Specialist Jameson. Broken femur. Shrapnel to the chest." The man nodded. His eyes glassy. "He talks about you like you're a guardian angel. I never thought I'd meet you." The laughter was gone. The shame? Suffocating. Those young men at table 6 suddenly looked very, very small. And Riley? For the first time in a long time, she stood tall. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a hero. A survivor. A soldier who had seen more, done more, and sacrificed more than anyone in that room could ever imagine. And today, finally, someone saw her. Truly saw her. Riley didn't flinch. She never did. Not when the jokes came, not when strangers stared, not even when children asked their parents, "Mom, what's wrong with her face?" It had become part of her day, like pouring coffee or balancing trays. But when the old man began walking toward her, something inside her shifted. He looked serious. Determined. And Riley felt her chest tighten. Was this going to be another insult? Another awkward customer trying to offer advice on how to hide her scars? Another person who didn't understand, and didn't care to? She took a quiet breath and turned toward him, ready for anything. Or so she thought. Because what happened next was something no one, not Riley, not the customers, not the mocking boys at table 6, could have expected. The man stopped just a few feet away from her. He stood tall, squared his shoulders, and with a trembling hand. He saluted her. Not casually. Not sarcastically. But with the firm, practiced precision of a man who knew exactly what that gesture meant. The room fell completely silent. No forks clinking. No phones tapping. No giggles. Just stillness, and stunned eyes watching something they couldn't quite understand. And then, the man spoke, his voice low, filled with emotion. "Staff Sergeant Riley Carter?" Riley froze. No one had called her that in years. Not since the discharge papers. Not since the day she packed her medals in a shoebox and walked out of a hospital, still healing from wounds both seen and unseen. "Yes, sir," she answered quietly. Her voice barely a whisper, but steady. Controlled. There were audible gasps around the room. Someone at the counter dropped their phone. A young girl leaned over and whispered to her mom, she was in the army. And the man, still holding her gaze, pointed to the tattoo on her arm. The one barely visible beneath the sleeve of her uniform. 3rd Medical Battalion. Special Forces Support. FOB Phoenix, he said softly. That's a combat unit mark. And that's no ordinary ink. Riley glanced down at it, then back at him, her heart pounding. Only someone who had been there would recognize that symbol. Only someone who understood its meaning could say those words. The man's eyes welled with tears. "My name is Lieutenant Paul Henderson. Retired. 82nd Airborne. You saved my nephew. Private First Class Jameson. 6 years ago. Kandahar Province. Roadside ambush." The memories came rushing back like a storm breaking through her mind. A burning Humvee. Screams. Blood. Heat. Smoke. Jameson, unconscious, bleeding out, and her hands pressing into his chest, trying to stop the flood of life pouring from him. She remembered calling in the medevac. Riding with him through the night. Whispering. "Stay with me, soldier. You're not dying on my watch." He told us, the man continued, his voice breaking, that he only made it because a crazy brave medic threw herself into the fire to save him. Said he never even got to thank her. Riley blinked, swallowing the lump in her throat. This wasn't happening. Not here. Not in the middle of greasy tables, half-eaten burgers, and spilled soda. Not in a place where people laughed at her scars without knowing the story behind them. But here it was. A moment of truth, raw and real, cutting through the noise like a razor. The lieutenant slowly lowered his salute and stepped closer. "You're not just a waitress," he said softly. You're a damn hero. Around the room, everything changed. The college boys who had made fun of her. Heads down. Faces flushed with shame. One of them looked like he wanted to disappear. The customers who had looked at her with discomfort, now looked with respect. Even the manager, usually hiding behind the counter, stood in awe. But Riley, she didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just nodded, quietly, humbly, the way soldiers do when they're thanked for doing something they never expected to be thanked for. Because to Riley, it wasn't about the recognition. It was about the lives. The ones she saved. The ones she couldn't. And the ones who never saw past her skin to the soul beneath it. But this man? This veteran? He saw her. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, she finally felt seen. Lieutenant Paul gently lowered himself into the booth across from Riley. He didn't rush. He didn't speak right away. He just looked at her, with the kind of eyes that had seen too much war, and recognized a kindred soul. The rest of the diner? Dead silent. No clinking forks. No rude whispers. Even the usual hum of chatter had vanished like fog in sunlight. People were watching, yes. But this wasn't the kind of spectacle they had expected. This was something deeper. Something sacred. Paul finally spoke, his voice steady but low. You've been through hell, haven't you? Riley gave a small, tired smile. The kind that says, you have no idea. But Paul did. He went on, telling the story that most of the room had no idea was hers. Back in 2019, there was a medevac report from Kandahar. Surprise ambush. 6 men down. Only 2 made it out. My nephew, Private First Class Jameson, was one of them. He always talked about this medic. Said she came out of nowhere, dragging bodies, screaming orders, taking shrapnel, just to keep everyone alive. He paused, then looked her square in the eyes. That medic was you. The word settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Riley looked down at the table. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of a napkin. She didn't need the reminder. The images of that day were burned into her memory, the sound of gunfire, the metallic scent of blood, the chaos, the pain, the heat from the explosion that nearly killed her. But it wasn't the pain that haunted her. It was the silence that came after. The silence of coming home to a country that clapped at airports but forgot about its warriors once they faded into the crowd. She came home with scars that twisted her skin and painkillers that numbed her soul. She didn't ask for applause. She just wanted peace. A job. A place to start over. Instead, she got mockery. From strangers who had no clue what she'd survived, or who she had saved. Paul reached across the table and gently tapped her forearm. You don't just carry scars, Riley, he said. You carry honor. The words hit her harder than she expected. For a moment, Riley looked up, and their eyes locked in unspoken understanding. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. Around them, the boys from table 6 sat frozen. Just 10 minutes ago, they were laughing. Calling her names. Mocking what they didn't understand. Now? They looked like children caught cheating on a test. One of them slowly stood up. His face was pale. His eyes avoided hers. He walked over, hands tucked in his pockets, and cleared his throat. I'm sorry, he muttered, barely loud enough to hear. Another one followed, whispering something too quiet to catch. Riley didn't respond. She didn't need to. The shame hanging in the air was punishment enough. But even more powerful than shame, was the shift. The shift in perspective. People started seeing Riley differently. Not as a server. Not as a scarred woman. But as someone who had once stood between life and death, and chose to fight. Paul sat back, now smiling gently. "You should be wearing a uniform, not an apron," he said with a chuckle. But then again, maybe this is where people need to see real heroes the most. Riley chuckled too, just a little. The first laugh she'd let out in weeks. Not because it was funny, but because it meant something. In a diner full of strangers, she had been invisible, until one person chose to see her for who she truly was. And sometimes, that's all it takes. Just one person to change how the world sees you. Or better yet, how you see yourself. Riley had never told anyone at the diner about her past. Not the manager. Not the cook. Not the regulars who left exact change and avoided eye contact. She didn't come here for recognition or sympathy. She came for peace. A steady job. A quiet life. A chance to blend in and breathe again. But day after day, blending in felt impossible. Because while she never talked about her scars, the world never stopped staring at them. They'd whisper. They'd wince. Some kids would point. Some adults would shush them, but they looked just the same. Like she was broken. Or strange. Or something to be pitied. What they didn't see was the soldier behind the scars. The healer who ran into fire when others ran away. The hero who crawled through rubble, bleeding, just to press bandages into another man's chest and say, "Hold on. I've got you." But none of that mattered here. Here, she was just the waitress with the messed up face. And that is the painful truth for so many veterans, especially women. They serve their country with pride. They come home with wounds, some on the surface, some buried deep. They don't ask for a parade. They don't want pity. But what they often get is judgment. Judgment for their silence. Judgment for their scars. Judgment for daring to survive something most people couldn't even imagine. Riley had fought for freedom, only to come back to a world that made her feel like she didn't belong in it. She wore long sleeves in the summer. She avoided mirrors. And most days, she said as little as possible. But once, just once, she opened up. It was late. The diner was almost empty. She was wiping down table 4 when a new coworker, fresh out of high school, finally asked the question everyone was too afraid to voice. "Riley, if you don't mind me asking, what happened?" There was no cruelty in her voice. Just curiosity. And maybe, a little compassion. Riley didn't answer right away. She finished folding a napkin, then leaned on the counter. "People think I was in a car crash," she said quietly. "Some think it was a house fire. One guy asked if it was an animal attack." She smiled, not because it was funny, but because she'd heard them all. Then she added something that stuck. "But the truth is, these scars? They're from saving lives. I wasn't running away. I was running in." The girl's eyes widened. But Riley didn't go further. She didn't need to. That one sentence said it all. She didn't owe anyone her story. But that didn't mean it didn't deserve to be respected. See, that's the thing people forget. Not all heroes come back with clean skin and polished uniforms. Some come back with wounds they'll carry forever. Not just on their bodies, but in how the world chooses to see them. And too often, it chooses to look away. But every scar has a story. Every silence has a reason. And sometimes, the strongest people in the room are the ones no one notices. Until someone finally asks. Until someone finally sees. Someone at the diner had recorded it. Not the insults. Not the mocking. But the moment Lieutenant Paul stood up, walked across the room, and saluted Riley. The camera caught everything, her frozen expression, his trembling voice, the silence that followed, and that unforgettable sentence. "You don't just carry scars, Riley. You carry honor." That clip, barely 2 minutes long, made its way to the internet. And in just 3 days, it exploded. 5 million views. Shared across platforms. Stitched into reaction videos. Translated into multiple languages. The world saw what the people in that diner had seen, but failed to appreciate at first. A woman who had served, suffered, and survived, without ever asking for applause. Comments flooded in by the thousands. Speech balloon, she's more than a waitress. She's a warrior. Speech balloon, this broke me. We walk past heroes every day and don't even know it. Speech balloon, respect to that veteran. And shame on those boys. Speech balloon, Riley, thank you for your service. And your strength. News outlets picked it up. Veterans organizations reached out. Even a senator shared the video with a simple caption. Heroes don't always wear medals. Sometimes, they carry trays. But Riley? She didn't care about the spotlight. She didn't want interviews or attention. She just wanted people to understand, to truly see her. Not as the woman with scars. Not as a curiosity behind the counter. But as a person. As a soldier. As someone who once gave everything, and asked for nothing. A few days later, something remarkable happened. The diner, the same one where Riley had worked quietly in the background for over a year, put up a sign. Veterans Appreciation Day, this Saturday. Honoring our own, Staff Sergeant Riley Carter. Riley didn't know about it until she walked in that morning. Balloons in red, white, and blue. A folded flag on the wall. A display of her photo in uniform, right beside a plaque that read. We salute you, Riley. For your strength. Your sacrifice. Your service. She stood there, stunned. Hands shaking. Eyes wide. She had been invisible for so long. Now, they were looking right at her, not in pity, but in respect. And then, someone walked through the door. It was them. The boys from Table 6. The ones who had laughed. Mocked. Hurled cruel words without a second thought. But this time, there was no laughter. Just silence. And in their hands, were flowers. One of them stepped forward. Eyes on the ground. Voice trembling. We were wrong, he said. I'm sorry. We didn't know. We didn't even think. But, now we do. Riley didn't say much. She just nodded. Because forgiveness doesn't always need words. Sometimes, just being heard is enough. The rest of the day was a blur of kind words, tearful hugs, and long overdue gratitude. Veterans came from across the county, some in wheelchairs, some in uniform, all with stories of their own. And one by one, they stood with her. Saluted her. Thanked her. Not because she needed it. But because she deserved it. That day wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about trending or fame. It was about recognition. About finally being seen, not for what hurt her, but for what she did with that pain. Riley stood taller that day. Not because her past had changed, but because the way people saw it had. She wasn't just a waitress with scars. She was a veteran, a healer, a hero, hiding in plain sight. And now, she was seen. Truly seen. Studio microphone, if Riley's story moved you, share it. Because out there, someone else with scars is still being overlooked. Let's change that.